If your heart feels heavy tonight, as though you've been carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders, you are not alone. There is a weariness that goes deeper than physical tiredness, a kind of exhaustion that settles into the bones, into the very spirit. Perhaps you've given so much of yourself that you've forgotten how to receive. Perhaps the demands of your days have become a relentless tide, and you are searching for solid ground. Take a deep breath now. Let your jaw unclench. Allow your shoulders to drop away from your ears. You have arrived at a place of rest. If you find comfort in this space and wish to return here for restoration, I gently invite you to subscribe to our community. Let us know in the comments where you are listening from tonight and what brought you here seeking peace. There was once a monastery nestled in mountains so remote that clouds would gather at its gates each morning like patient visitors. In this sanctuary lived a monk named Hiroshi, whose days had become a blur of endless tasks. He tended the gardens, prepared meals for his brothers, copied sacred texts by candlelight, and offered counsel to villagers who climbed the mountain path seeking wisdom. Hiroshi believed that to serve was to be holy, that to rest was to be selfish. Each morning he woke before dawn. Each night he was the last to extinguish his lamp. His fellow monks admired his dedication, but they also noticed something troubling. The light in Hiroshi's eyes had begun to dim. His movements, once fluid and graceful, had become mechanical. When he sat in meditation, his mind would not settle, but instead raced through lists of unfinished tasks. The abbot, an ancient teacher named Master Kenji, observed all of this in silence. Master Kenji had lived through many seasons and had witnessed countless students burn themselves out in the fire of their own ambition to be good, to be enough, to be worthy. He knew that Hiroshi's exhaustion was not merely physical, it was a spiritual crisis, a forgetting of something essential. One evening, as Hiroshi rushed through the temple corridors, carrying an armload of firewood, Master Kenji stepped into his path. The old teacher said nothing, but his presence was like a stone wall, gentle yet immovable. Hiroshi stopped, breathing heavily, his arms aching. "Master, forgive me. I must prepare the fires before evening prayers," Hiroshi said, his voice tight with urgency. Master Kenji tilted his head slightly. "Tell me, when you prepare these fires, do you feel the warmth?" The question hung in the air like incense smoke. Hiroshi opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. When had he last actually felt anything? The warmth of fire, the coolness of water, the satisfaction of completed work. All of it had become background noise to his constant doing. I don't know, Master." The old teacher reached out and took the firewood from Hiroshi's arms, setting it gently on the ground. "Come with me," he said. They walked together through the monastery grounds as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold. Master Kenji led Hiroshi to a small pond at the edge of the property, a place the younger monk had passed 1,000 times, but never truly seen. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the emerging stars like a mirror. "Sit," Master Kenji instructed. Hiroshi sat on the grass beside the pond, his body grateful for the rest, even as his mind protested. There was so much to do. The fires weren't lit. The evening meal needed preparing. The scrolls were waiting. "What do you see?" Master Kenji asked. "Water," Hiroshi replied. "The pond. Look deeper." Hiroshi stared at the surface. In the failing light, he could see the reflection of trees, the sky, a single star beginning to glow. "I see reflections, Master." "Yes. Now, throw a stone." Hiroshi picked up a small pebble and tossed it into the center of the pond. Immediately, ripples spread outward in perfect circles, distorting all the reflections, turning the clear mirror into a chaos of broken images and fractured light. "What do you see now?" Master Kenji asked. "Disturbance. The images are broken. And if you throw another stone, and another, and another, the water would never be still, the reflections would never be clear. Master Kenji nodded slowly. Your life has become like this pond when stones are constantly thrown into it. Action after action, task after task, responsibility upon responsibility. You have forgotten that the pond's true nature is stillness. You have forgotten that your true nature is peace. Hiroshi felt something crack open in his chest, a dam breaking, releasing waters long held back. But Master, if I stop, if I rest, everything will fall apart. People need me. The work is important. Is it more important than your own soul? The question was not harsh, but infinitely tender. Tell me, Hiroshi, when a lamp runs out of oil, can it light the darkness? No, Master. Then how can you light the way for others when your own flame is dying? They sat together in silence as the night deepened around them. The stars multiplied overhead, and the pond gradually returned to stillness, once again becoming a perfect mirror. Hiroshi watched this transformation, understanding for the first time that stillness was not the absence of action, but its foundation. The pond was always still in its depths, even when its surface was disturbed. Perhaps he too had such depths, places within himself that remained peaceful regardless of the chaos above. I don't know how to stop, Hiroshi finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I've forgotten how to simply be. Master Kenji smiled, and in that smile was the warmth of 1,000 suns. Then you have taken the first step toward remembering. Awareness of our condition is the seed of transformation. You cannot heal what you do not acknowledge. The old teacher rose to his feet with surprising grace. For the next 7 days, you will do nothing. Hiroshi's eyes widened in alarm. Nothing, but Master, nothing that you consider work, Master Kenji clarified. You will not tend the gardens. You will not prepare meals. You will not copy texts. Instead, you will practice the most difficult task of all. You will practice being human rather than a human doing. I don't understand what that means, Hiroshi said. Then discovering its meaning will be your practice. When you wake tomorrow, you will come to this pond. You will sit here and watch the water. When hunger comes, you will go to the kitchen and receive food that others have prepared. When tiredness comes, you will sleep. When thoughts of tasks arise, you will watch them like clouds passing through the sky, but you will not chase them. Can you do this? Every fiber of Hiroshi's being wanted to argue, to negotiate, to find a compromise that would allow him to rest and work simultaneously. But something deeper, something wiser, recognized the necessity of this prescription. He was dying by inches, and Master Kenji was offering him life. Yes, Master, I will try. Do not try, the old teacher said gently. Simply allow. There is a difference. That night, Hiroshi lay in his simple room, staring at the ceiling. His body was exhausted, but his mind raced with all the things that would not get done, all the ways he would fail his brothers, all the disappointment he would cause. He worried that they would think him lazy, selfish, weak. He worried that he would discover he was those things. But beneath the worry, like a distant song carried on the wind, he felt something else, a tiny spark of hope. What if rest were not weakness but wisdom? What if caring for himself were not selfish but sacred? What if he had worth beyond his productivity? These questions accompanied him into restless dreams, where he saw himself as a candle burning at both ends, the wax melting away, the light growing dimmer. In the dream, Master Kenji appeared and simply blew out the flame. Hiroshi expected darkness, but instead the sun rose. He woke before dawn, as was his habit, and his body began to move automatically toward his morning tasks. Then he remembered. 7 days of nothing. 7 days of being. He took a deep breath and felt the resistance in his chest. The almost physical pain of stopping, of going against years of conditioning. Slowly, Hiroshi made his way through the pre-dawn darkness to the pond. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of pine and earth. He sat on the damp grass in the same spot where he had sat with Master Kenji. The world was still and silent except for the occasional call of a distant bird greeting the coming day. At first, sitting felt like torture. His legs twitched with the urge to move. His hands felt empty, without tasks to perform. His mind generated an endless list of everything that needed doing, everyone he was letting down, all the ways this was wrong. He watched these thoughts arise, one after another, like an army marching through his consciousness. But he had promised Master Kenji. More importantly, he had promised himself, so he stayed. As the sun began to paint the eastern sky in shades of rose and amber, something shifted. The frantic energy of his thoughts began to lose momentum. In the space between one worry and the next, he noticed the actual moment he was inhabiting, the coolness of the morning, the way light touched the surface of the pond, transforming it from black to silver to gold, the sensation of breath entering and leaving his body. These were not new experiences. He had breathed every moment of his life, had seen countless sunrises, but he realized he had not truly experienced any of them. He had been present only as a ghost, his attention always somewhere else, always in the future where tasks awaited, or in the past where mistakes lived. A small bird landed at the pond's edge to drink. Hiroshi watched it dip its beak into the water, watched it tilt its head back, watched it ruffle its feathers in what seemed like pure contentment. The bird was not worried about tomorrow's water. It was not guilty about yesterday's flight. It was simply, perfectly, here. Be like the bird, Hiroshi whispered to himself. Just be here. As morning deepened into day, other monks passed by on their way to various tasks. Some glanced at him with curiosity, some with knowing smiles. Hiroshi felt self-conscious, imagining they thought him lazy. But he stayed. He had made a commitment, and though every habitual part of him wanted to break it, something deeper held him to his seat. Around midday, his stomach rumbled. Hunger. Such a simple thing, yet Hiroshi realized he usually ate while working, shoveling food into his mouth between tasks, barely tasting it. Now, hunger announced itself clearly, without competition. He rose stiffly, his body unused to sitting so long, and walked to the kitchen. One of the younger monks, Takeo, was preparing the midday meal. He looked up in surprise when Hiroshi entered. "Brother Hiroshi, are you unwell? Master Kenji said you would not be working this week." "I'm not working," Hiroshi said, the words feeling strange on his tongue. "I've come to eat." Takeo served him a bowl of rice with vegetables and miso soup. Hiroshi carried it to a bench outside the kitchen and sat down. He looked at the bowl, really looked at it. The white rice, each grain distinct. The green vegetables, vibrant against the earthen color of the bowl. Steam rising in delicate spirals. He brought the bowl to his lips and took a sip of soup. The taste exploded in his mouth. Salty, savory, complex. Had food always tasted like this? He chewed slowly, feeling the texture of each grain of rice, the crispness of the vegetables. He was not just eating, he was truly tasting, truly experiencing nourishment entering his body. Tears unexpectedly filled his eyes. How many meals had he eaten in his life? Thousands, tens of thousands. And how many had he actually experienced? This simple act of eating with full attention was revealing something profound. He had been living his life without actually living it, going through the motions while his spirit slept. After eating, Hiroshi returned to the pond. The afternoon sun was warm on his face. He laid back on the grass and looked up at the sky, watching clouds drift by in their slow, purposeless dance. When had he last laid on the grass? When had he last watched clouds? Probably as a child, before he learned that productivity was virtue and rest was sin. One cloud looked like a dragon, another like a mountain. They shifted and changed, never remaining the same, teaching without words the lesson of impermanence. Everything changes, everything flows. Why was he holding so tightly to his tasks, his identity as the hard-working monk, when even mountains carved by clouds cannot remain unchanged? As the afternoon stretched toward evening, Hiroshi noticed something remarkable happening within him. The desperate need to do, to accomplish, to prove his worth began to loosen its grip. It was still there, like a habit so old it had worn grooves into his being, but it no longer commanded him with absolute authority. Small gaps were opening, spaces of simple presence where nothing needed to be different than it was. A dragonfly landed on a reed near the pond's edge, its wings catching the light like stained glass. Hiroshi watched it with complete attention, marveling at its delicate architecture, the impossibility of its flight. The dragonfly asked nothing of him. It did not need him to be productive or useful or important. It simply existed in its own perfect completeness, and in that moment, so did he. Master Kenji appeared as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The old teacher carried 2 cups of tea, steam rising from them like prayers. He sat beside Hiroshi without speaking and handed him one of the cups. They drank together in silence, watching the light change, watching the world transition from day to night. Finally, Master Kenji spoke. "How do you feel?" Hiroshi considered the question carefully. How did he feel? Not what did he think, not what had he accomplished, but how did he feel? "Raw," he said after a moment. "Like a layer of skin has been removed. Everything seems brighter, sharper. I notice things I've never noticed before, even though I've walked these grounds for years. It's strange and uncomfortable, but also," he searched for the right word, "alive. I feel alive." Master Kenji nodded. This is what happens when we stop numbing ourselves with constant activity. We feel again. And yes, sometimes what we feel is uncomfortable. The grief we've been avoiding, the loneliness we've been outrunning, the fear we've been denying. But we also feel joy, wonder, connection. We feel the full spectrum of what it means to be human. "I think I've been afraid of feeling," Hiroshi admitted. "If I stay busy enough, I don't have to face the emptiness inside me." Yes, this is common. We are taught that our value comes from what we do, from how much we produce, from how helpful we are to others. So we become terrified of stopping, because if our worth comes from doing, then who are we when we do nothing? We fear we will discover we are nothing. "And is that true?" Hiroshi asked, voicing the question that had haunted him all day. "Am I nothing without my work?" Master Kenji smiled and set down his teacup. He reached out and placed his hand over Hiroshi's heart. "You are not nothing. You are everything. You are the sky that holds the clouds. You are the pond that reflects the stars. You are awareness itself, the consciousness through which the universe comes to know itself. Your worth is not earned through action. It is inherent in your being. You are valuable not because of what you do, but because you are." These words landed in Hiroshi like seeds in fertile soil. Somewhere deep within him, beneath all the layers of conditioning and belief, something recognized their truth. He began to weep, not sad tears, but tears of relief, of homecoming, of a burden finally set down after being carried for far too long. Master Kenji sat with him as he cried, one hand still resting over his heart, anchoring him to the truth of his own worthiness. When the tears finally subsided, Hiroshi felt emptied and clean, like a vessel that had been scoured of old residue. "This is only the first day," Master Kenji said gently. "The conditioning runs deep. Tomorrow, and the next day, and the next, you will feel the pull to return to your old patterns. The voice in your head will tell you that you're being lazy, that you're letting people down, that you should be doing more. But I want you to recognize that voice for what it is. Not truth, but fear. Not wisdom, but wounding." "How do I tell the difference," Hiroshi asked, "between wisdom and wounding?" "Wisdom speaks with compassion. It is firm but gentle. It does not shame or diminish. Wounding speaks with harshness. It uses words like should and must. It tells you that you're not enough. When you hear these different voices, pause and ask yourself, is this voice inviting me toward wholeness, or is it driving me toward depletion? Is this voice calling me home to myself, or exiling me from my own heart? They sat together as darkness fully claimed the sky, and stars emerged one by one, like lights being lit in an infinite city. Hiroshi felt the vastness of the universe above and within him, and for the first time in years, he did not feel small or insignificant. He felt connected, part of an intricate web of being that needed nothing from him except his presence, his authentic aliveness. That night, Hiroshi slept more deeply than he had in months. His dreams were not the usual anxious rehearsals of tasks and responsibilities, but rather a gentle flowing of images, rivers and birds, sunlight through leaves, the smile of his master. He woke naturally, without the jarring alarm of obligation, and lay in his bed, watching the slow arrival of dawn through his window. His body felt different, heavier somehow, as though he had returned to it after a long absence. He realized that he had been living mostly in his head, in the realm of thoughts and plans, rarely descending into the actual felt experience of inhabiting a body. Now, he could feel the weight of his limbs, the rhythm of his breath, the beating of his heart. It was strange and wondrous, this return to flesh and bone. He rose slowly and made his way once again to the pond. It had become his anchor point, the physical location that represented his commitment to himself. The grass was heavy with dew, and it soaked through his sandals, cool and startling. Another sensation he would have missed in his usual rush from task to task. The second day of doing nothing felt different from the first. The novelty had worn off, and what remained was the actual work of it, the discipline of staying present, of not escaping into busyness. The resistance was stronger now. His mind generated increasingly creative reasons why he should cut his rest short, why this was self-indulgent, why others needed him. At one point, he saw a stack of wood that needed splitting for the coming winter. His hands literally itched to pick up the axe, to do something useful, to earn his place. The urge was almost overwhelming, but he remembered Master Kenji's words about recognizing the voice of wounding, and he realized that beneath the urge to work was a deep, aching fear. If I don't prove my worth through usefulness, I will be abandoned. I will be alone. This fear, when he finally acknowledged it clearly, was devastating. He saw how it had driven him his entire life, how he had become a human doing rather than a human being because he believed that love and belonging had to be earned, that rest had to be justified, that his existence was something he needed to apologize for unless he could point to achievements and service. "I'm so tired," he whispered to himself, to the pond, to the morning. "I'm so tired of trying to earn my right to exist." As if in response, a leaf fell from the tree above him and landed on the surface of the pond. It floated there, perfectly at ease, borne up by the water without effort. The leaf did not need to earn its place on the pond. The water simply held it, because that was the water's nature, to hold, to support, to nourish. The leaf could simply be held. Hiroshi watched the floating leaf for a long time, feeling something shift inside him. What if the universe was like the water? What if he could stop efforting and striving and simply allow himself to be held? What if belonging was not something to be achieved, but something to be received? As the day progressed, he practiced this receiving. When hunger came, he received food. When thirst came, he received water. When tiredness came, he lay in the shade of a tree and received rest. Each act of receiving felt radical, rebellious even, because his entire life had been built on the premise that he must give, produce, and serve in order to justify taking up space in the world. But here is what Hiroshi was beginning to understand. By constantly giving from an empty well, he was actually serving no one. He had become like a lantern whose light was dying because no one ever added oil. In his determination to help others, he had forgotten that he too was worthy of care, including, especially, his own care. By the afternoon of the second day, something unexpected began to happen. As Hiroshi sat by the pond in his now familiar spot, doing nothing in particular, simply being present, he became aware of a subtle energy rising within him. It was faint at first, like the first hint of dawn on the horizon, but unmistakable. It was not the frantic, anxious energy that had driven him before, the desperate push to complete tasks and prove himself. This was something different, softer, gentler, but also stronger, like a deep current flowing beneath turbulent surface waters. This was life force itself, naturally arising when given space to do so. Hiroshi realized with wonder that he had been so depleted, so chronically exhausted, that he had forgotten what it felt like to have energy that was not manufactured through willpower or fueled by anxiety. This was energy that came from being in alignment with his own nature, from honoring rather than overriding his needs. Master Kenji came by in the late afternoon, and they walked together through the monastery gardens. Hiroshi noticed that his master moved with such ease, such unhurried grace. There was no sense of rushing from one thing to the next, yet somehow everything that needed doing got done. "Master," Hiroshi asked, "how do you know when to act and when to rest? How do you find balance?" The old teacher paused beside a cherry tree and ran his hand along its trunk. "Do you see this tree?" he asked. "In spring it produces blossoms, thousands of them. It gives its energy freely, covering the ground with pink petals. But it does not blossom all year. After the spring flowering, it focuses on growing leaves, on producing fruit, on strengthening its roots. Then in autumn, it releases its leaves. In winter, it rests. The tree does not call itself lazy in winter. It does not feel guilty for not blooming. It trusts the wisdom of seasons." Hiroshi looked at the tree with new eyes, seeing it as a teacher. "So, I too have seasons. All living things do. There are times for action and times for stillness, times for giving and times for receiving, times for growth and times for consolidation. The problem arises when we try to live in an eternal spring, always blooming, always producing, denying ourselves the fallow times that are necessary for genuine renewal. But how do I know which season I'm in? By listening to your body, your heart, your soul. They will tell you what is needed, but you must become quiet enough to hear them. This is why meditation is not optional for those who wish to live wisely. It is the practice of listening to the truth beneath the noise." They continued walking, and Hiroshi found himself moving differently. Instead of his usual hurried pace, he matched his steps to Master Kenji's unhurried rhythm. He noticed that at this slower pace, he could actually see the world around him, the play of light through leaves, the movement of insects, the textures of bark and stone. Speed, he realized, was not efficiency. It was often a form of blindness. As evening approached, they reached a small meditation hall at the far edge of the monastery grounds. Master Kenji invited Hiroshi inside, where they sat together on cushions facing a simple altar with a single candle burning. The flame was steady and bright, illuminating the darkening space. "Watch the flame," Master Kenji instructed. Hiroshi watched. The flame danced slightly in the still air, but mostly it burned steady and true, neither too high nor too low, consuming the candle at a sustainable pace. It occurred to Hiroshi that the flame was not trying to burn brighter or faster than its fuel allowed. It simply burned in accordance with what was available. "This flame is your life force," Master Kenji said quietly. "It burns brightest when it is neither starved nor wasteful, when it consumes fuel at a rate that can be sustained. For too long you have been trying to burn brighter than your fuel allows, and so your flame has been dying. Emotional burnout is what happens when we use up our vital energy faster than we can replenish it. It is not a moral failing. It is simple mathematics." "But Master, the world needs so much. There is so much suffering, so many people who need help. How can I rest when there is so much to do? Master Kenji turned to face him fully, and his eyes were infinitely compassionate. My dear student, you cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot light another's darkness with a candle that has gone out. The world does not need you to destroy yourself in service. The world needs you whole, rested, and genuinely present. A single hour of action from a rested, clear-minded, open-hearted person is worth more than a week of action from someone who is depleted and resentful. These words struck Hiroshi like a bell, sending vibrations through every part of his being. He had believed that self-sacrifice was the highest virtue, that to preserve anything for himself was selfish. But Master Kenji was offering a different wisdom, that self-care was not opposed to service, but was its very foundation. You could not give what you did not have. You could not offer peace from a place of inner turmoil. You could not genuinely serve from a place of depletion and martyrdom. I think I've been confusing suffering with virtue, Hiroshi said slowly, the realization dawning. I thought that if I wasn't exhausted, I wasn't working hard enough. If I wasn't sacrificing, I wasn't truly serving. Yes, this is a common confusion, but consider, does the Buddha in our temple look exhausted, depleted? No. The Buddha's image conveys peace, wholeness, sufficiency. The awakened life is not one of constant sacrifice and suffering. It is one of wisdom, balance, and inner harmony. When we are whole, we naturally overflow with generosity. But this generosity comes from abundance, not depletion. They sat in silence for a long while, watching the candle burn. Hiroshi felt layers of belief and conditioning beginning to crack and fall away, like old paint peeling from a wall to reveal the original structure beneath. What remained when the false beliefs were removed? What was his true nature underneath all the doing and striving? Stillness, peace, awareness, love. These qualities had always been there, he realized, like the sun behind clouds. He had not needed to create them or earn them. He had only needed to stop obscuring them with his constant busyness, his addiction to productivity, his fear of being insufficient. As night deepened outside the meditation hall, Master Kenji spoke again. Tomorrow is your third day. The resistance will likely be even stronger. The voice of conditioning does not give up easily. It will tell you that this exercise is foolish, that you've rested enough, that you need to get back to real life. But I encourage you to continue. The layers of burnout and depletion are deep. 1 or 2 days of rest barely touches the surface. You need time for your nervous system to truly settle, for your mind to truly quiet, for your spirit to truly restore. I'll continue, Hiroshi promised, and he meant it. Something precious was beginning to emerge within him, like a spring of fresh water bubbling up from deep underground. He didn't want to abandon this process prematurely, didn't want to cut short this homecoming to himself. That night, as he lay in his room, Hiroshi reflected on the past 2 days. He had done nothing, and yet so much had happened. He had begun to feel again, to notice again, to come back into his own body and life. He had started to question beliefs that had governed him for years. He had glimpsed, however briefly, a different way of being, one not driven by fear and anxiety, but guided by inner wisdom and self-compassion. The tears came again, but they were different now. Not tears of pain, but tears of relief, of mourning, of letting go. He was grieving for all the years he had abandoned himself, all the moments he had missed while lost in his mind, all the ways he had been cruel to himself in the name of virtue. But he was also celebrating, because it was never too late to choose differently, never too late to come home to himself. He slept deeply, and in his dreams, he was a tree with deep roots and wide branches, giving shade not from a sense of obligation, but from simple, natural abundance. The third morning arrived with gentle rain, drops pattering on the roof of Hiroshi's small room. He listened to the sound for a while before rising, noticing how the rhythm of rain had a quality of meditation to it, repetitive, soothing, asking nothing. When he finally stood and dressed, he felt something different in his body. The constant tension in his shoulders had diminished. His jaw was looser. His breath came more easily. He walked to the pond despite the rain, or perhaps because of it. Water falling from the sky to meet water resting on the earth. There was something poetic in this, something that spoke to the cycles of giving and receiving that Master Kenji had been teaching him about. The rain fell freely, not worried about whether it was needed or wanted. It simply fell because falling was its nature. The pond received freely, not concerned about deserving the rain or earning it. It simply received because receiving was its nature. Hiroshi sat under the broad leaves of a nearby tree, sheltered from the heaviest rain, but still feeling the spray on his face. The surface of the pond was alive with countless tiny impacts, circles spreading and intersecting and overlapping, creating patterns of exquisite complexity. Each raindrop was individual, yet together they created something greater than themselves. A symphony, a dance, a teaching. As Master Kenji had predicted, the resistance was stronger today. The voice in Hiroshi's head was no longer gentle or persuasive, but harsh and demanding. "This is ridiculous," it said. "You've rested. Now get back to work. People are covering for you. They think you're weak. You're being selfish and lazy. You should be ashamed." Hiroshi recognized this voice now, not as truth, but as wounding speaking. This was the internalized voice of every authority figure who had ever told him his worth was conditional. Every moment he had felt he had to earn love. Every time rest was framed as weakness. This voice had driven him to the edge of collapse, and now it was angry that he was refusing to obey. "Thank you for trying to protect me," Hiroshi said quietly to the voice, a practice Master Kenji had taught him. "I know you believe that driving me harder will keep me safe, will make me worthy, will ensure I'm not abandoned. But you are wrong. The way to safety is not through exhaustion. The way to worthiness is not through depletion. I'm choosing a different path." The voice didn't disappear, but it lost some of its power. Hiroshi had stepped back from it, had stopped believing it automatically, and in that space of disbelief, freedom emerged. As the morning progressed and the rain continued its patient falling, a young monk named Daichi came looking for Hiroshi. Daichi was one of the newest members of the monastery, still learning the ways of practice, and he had come to rely on Hiroshi's guidance. "Brother Hiroshi," Daichi called out, his voice uncertain. "I'm sorry to disturb you. Master Kenji said you were resting, but I'm struggling with my meditation practice, and I wondered if you might have time to advise me." Hiroshi felt the old familiar pull. Someone needed him. Therefore he should respond, should help, should set aside his own needs to meet another's. This was the pattern that had led to his burnout, this inability to maintain boundaries, this belief that everyone else's needs were more important than his own. But something was different now. He could see the pattern clearly, could feel the trap of it, and seeing it clearly, he had the power to choose differently. "Daichi," Hiroshi said gently, "I appreciate your trust in coming to me, but I'm in a period of deep rest right now, healing from exhaustion. I'm not available to teach at the moment. However, Brother Kenji is an excellent teacher, as is Brother Thomas. Perhaps you might seek their guidance instead." The words felt strange coming out of his mouth, putting his own needs first, saying no, redirecting rather than immediately stepping in to help. The guilt rose up, familiar and strong, but beneath the guilt was something else, a sense of rightness, of integrity, of self-respect. Daichi looked surprised, perhaps even a little hurt, but he nodded. "Of course, brother. I understand. I hope your rest is healing." He bowed and walked away through the rain. Hiroshi sat with the discomfort of having said no, having disappointed someone, having not been immediately available and helpful. This was hard. This was the work that nobody warned you about, that establishing boundaries and honoring your own needs would feel wrong at first, would trigger guilt and shame, would challenge every belief about what made you a good person. But as Hiroshi sat with the discomfort, breathing through it rather than trying to fix it or escape it, something began to shift. He realized that by saying no to Daiichi's request in this moment, he was actually serving a greater yes. He was saying yes to his own healing, which would ultimately make him a better teacher, a more present monk, a more authentic human being. He was also teaching Daiichi, through his actions, that self-care was not selfish, that boundaries were healthy, that wholeness mattered. The rain began to ease, and a break appeared in the clouds, allowing a shaft of sunlight to pierce through. It illuminated the pond in a strange, beautiful way. The surface still dimpled with rain, but now lit from above, turning the water into a field of liquid diamonds. Hiroshi caught his breath at the beauty of it. When had he last allowed himself to simply appreciate beauty? When had he last stopped long enough to be moved by the world's artistry? Master Kenji appeared, as he seemed to have a habit of doing, at precisely the right moment. He sat beside Hiroshi under the tree and looked out at the illuminated pond. Beautiful, isn't it? He said simply. Yes, Hiroshi agreed. I'm beginning to see beauty everywhere. It's as though my eyes are opening after a long sleep. This is what happens when we slow down. Beauty requires attention, and attention requires that we not be rushing from one thing to the next. This is one of the great losses of a life lived in constant burnout. We miss the beauty, the small moments of grace that make existence sacred. They sat together in companionable silence. Finally, Hiroshi spoke. Master, Daiichi came to me for help, and I said no. I told him I wasn't available because I was resting. It felt wrong, but also right. I'm confused. Master Kenji smiled. Good. Confusion is often the first sign of wisdom. Let me ask you, if you had said yes to Daiichi, helped him with his question, would you have been fully present with him? Hiroshi considered this honestly. No, he admitted. I would have been resentful, depleted. Part of me would have been angry at him for interrupting my rest, even though he didn't know he was doing anything wrong. I would have given him advice, but it would have been mechanical, not coming from a place of genuine presence. Exactly. So by saying no, you gave him something more valuable than advice. You gave him an example of healthy boundaries. You gave him permission, through your actions, to honor his own needs in the future. And you preserved your energy, so that when you are ready to teach again, you can do so from a place of fullness rather than emptiness. But what if people need me and I'm not there? Master Kenji chuckled softly. My dear Hiroshi, this is the illusion of indispensability. It is ego disguised as service. The monastery functioned before you came, and it will function after you leave. No single person is indispensable. There are always others who can help, other resources available. When you believe you are the only one who can help, you create a trap for yourself, and often for others as well, because you prevent them from discovering their own strength and resourcefulness. This was a hard teaching, but Hiroshi recognized its truth. Part of his exhaustion came from believing he had to do everything himself, that he was uniquely responsible for everyone's well-being. This belief had inflated his sense of importance, while simultaneously crushing him under the weight of impossible expectations. So, saying no can be an act of love? Hiroshi asked. Saying no to others can be a profound yes to yourself, and that yes is not selfish, it is self-full. It is acknowledging that you too are worthy of care, of boundaries, of rest. When you consistently betray yourself to please others, you become resentful and depleted. But when you honor yourself while also being compassionate to others, you maintain integrity. You become whole. The sun emerged fully from behind the clouds, and steam began to rise from the wet earth, creating an ethereal landscape of mist and light. Hiroshi felt something releasing in his chest, a tightness he hadn't even known he was carrying. The permission to say no, to have boundaries, to honor his own needs. This was a gift beyond measure. As the days continued to unfold in their slow, spacious way, Hiroshi moved deeper into the practice of rest. The fourth day was marked by a profound exhaustion, as though his body, finally given permission to stop, was revealing just how tired it truly was. He slept for hours in the afternoon, a deep, dreamless sleep, and woke feeling heavy and slow. This, Master Kenji explained when Hiroshi worried that something was wrong, was the recovery process. His body was finally getting what it needed, and was showing him the depth of the debt he had accrued. In our culture, we celebrate those who need little sleep, who can push through fatigue, who seem to have boundless energy, Master Kenji said. But these are not virtues. They are often symptoms of disconnection from the body's wisdom. Your body is not your servant to be commanded. It is your partner in this life, and it has its own intelligence. When you override its signals consistently, eventually it will rebel. Illness, injury, emotional burnout, these are not punishments, but communications. Your body is trying to tell you something important. Hiroshi thought about all the signals he had ignored over the years. The headaches, the stomach problems, the constant low-level anxiety, the inability to sleep well. He had seen these as weaknesses to be overcome rather than messages to be heeded. I've been at war with my own body, he realized aloud. Yes, and now it is time for peace, time to listen, to honor, to work in partnership with your physical form rather than against it. On the fifth day, something unexpected happened. Hiroshi woke not with exhaustion, but with a curious sense of alertness and presence. His mind was clear in a way it hadn't been in years. Not the frantic clarity of anxiety and adrenaline, but a calm, spacious clarity, like a still pond reflecting the sky. When he walked to his spot by the water, every sense seemed heightened. Colors were more vivid, sounds were more distinct. The air on his skin was a tangible presence. This, he understood, was what it felt like to not be depleted. This was his natural state, buried under years of exhaustion and stress. He had forgotten that peace and clarity were his birthright, not special states to be achieved through intense effort, but simply what remained when he stopped interfering with his own well-being. He sat by the pond and found himself spontaneously meditating in a way he never had before. Previously, meditation had been another task on his list, something to be accomplished. He would sit, trying to force his mind to be still, judging himself harshly when it wandered. Treating the practice as a test, he was constantly failing. But now, meditation happened naturally. His attention simply rested on the breath, on the sounds, on the sensations in his body. And when it wandered, he gently guided it back without criticism. This was not meditation as doing, but meditation as being. And in that being, insights arose like fish breaking the surface of still water, brief, gleaming, true. He saw how much of his life had been driven by fear, by the sense of never being enough. He saw how he had used busyness as a shield against feeling, against truly encountering himself. He saw how the voice of his inner critic had actually been trying, in its harsh way, to protect him from rejection and failure, even though its methods had been causing the very outcomes it sought to prevent. But these insights did not come with judgment or shame. They simply arose as observations, as pieces of self-understanding that could inform different choices going forward. This was the gift of rest and perspective, the ability to see clearly without being overwhelmed, to understand without being crushed by that understanding. As the sun climbed higher, Master Kenji joined Hiroshi by the pond, carrying a small wooden box. He sat down and opened the box, revealing several smooth stones of different colors and sizes. Without speaking, he began to arrange them on the ground between them, creating patterns, a circle, a line, a spiral. Then he would sweep them away and begin again with a different configuration. Hiroshi watched, uncertain what teaching was being offered. Finally, he asked, "Master, what are you doing?" "I am playing," Master Kenji said simply, a a smile crinkling his ancient eyes. "When was the last time you played, Hiroshi?" The question landed with unexpected weight. When was the last time he had done something purely for enjoyment, with no purpose or goal? He couldn't remember. Every activity in his life had become functional, instrumental, a means to some end. Even his meditation had been about achieving enlightenment, his conversations about fulfilling duty, his walks about getting from one place to another. Play, purposeless, joyful, creative play, had been completely absent. "I don't know how to play anymore," Hiroshi admitted, feeling a deep sadness at this recognition. "I've forgotten." "Then we must teach you to remember," Master Kenji said. He pushed some of the stones toward Hiroshi. "Here, make a pattern. Any pattern. There is no right or wrong. Just arrange them in a way that pleases you." Hiroshi felt ridiculous at first, like a child being asked to do something beneath his dignity, but he reached out and began to move the stones, placing them in a simple line by size. It felt mechanical, forced. Master Kenji watched without comment. Hiroshi tried again, this time making a circle with one stone in the center. Better, but still self-conscious. Then, almost without thinking, his hands began to move more freely. He created a spiral, then added smaller stones around it like petals, then a curved line leading away like a path. Something in him relaxed, and he found himself fully absorbed in the simple act of creation, of arranging form and color and space in a way that pleased him for no reason other than it pleased him. When he finally sat back and looked at what he had made, he felt a small bubble of joy rise in his chest. It was nothing special, this arrangement of stones. It served no purpose. But it was his, an expression of something inside him that had nothing to do with duty or achievement. "Beautiful," Master Kenji said. "You are remembering. Play is not frivolous, though our culture treats it as such. Play is how we connect with our creative essence. How we remember that life is not just about survival and productivity, but about joy, about expression, about the simple pleasure of existence. Children know this naturally, but adults often need to relearn it. They spent the next hour playing with stones, creating patterns and destroying them, laughing at the unexpected beauty that emerged from random arrangements, delighting in the pure pointlessness of it all. And in that pointlessness, Hiroshi found something profound, the recovery of a part of himself that had been buried under years of grim seriousness and relentless responsibility. That evening, Hiroshi noticed that other monks were beginning to treat him differently. Some seemed curious, asking how his rest was going. Others seemed almost envious, as though they too wished for permission to stop, to rest, to care for themselves. One older monk, Brother Takeshi, approached him after the evening meal. "I have been watching you this week," Takeshi said quietly. "I see something changing in you. You move differently. You seem lighter. I have been feeling exhausted for years, but I thought this was simply how life had to be. Watching you rest with Master Kenji's blessing makes me wonder if I too might need this. If I too might be burning out." Hiroshi felt deep compassion for this older monk, seeing in him a reflection of his own struggle. "Perhaps you should speak with Master Kenji," he suggested gently. "I'm learning that burnout is not a badge of honor. It's a signal that something needs to change." Takeshi nodded thoughtfully and walked away, but Hiroshi could see that a seed had been planted. This was another unexpected gift of his rest. By honoring his own needs, he was giving others permission to honor theirs. By being willing to stop, he was challenging the cultural belief that worth equals productivity, that rest must be earned, that exhaustion is somehow noble. On the 6th day, Hiroshi woke with a sense of anticipation. Tomorrow would be his 7th and final day of prescribed rest, and he found himself both eager to return to engagement with the monastery's activities and also reluctant to leave this protected space of stillness and self-care. He had changed fundamentally over these days, and he worried about losing what he had gained once he returned to normal life. Master Kenji, who seemed to read thoughts as easily as most people read books, addressed this concern during their afternoon meeting. "You are wondering how to maintain what you have learned when you return to activity," he observed. Hiroshi nodded. "I'm afraid I'll fall back into old patterns. That all of this will have been for nothing. It is a valid concern. The pull of old habits is strong, but you will not be the same person returning to activity as you were when you stopped. You have learned things this week that cannot be unlearned. You have felt what it's like to be rested, to be present, to honor your own needs. That felt experience will serve as a compass going forward. But how do I maintain boundaries when I return to work? How do I not fall back into overextending myself?" Master Kenji picked up a cup of tea and held it up. "Tell me, how full is this cup?" Hiroshi looked at it. "About 3/4 full. If I keep pouring, what will happen? It will overflow. Yes, the cup has a boundary, its rim. When liquid reaches that boundary, the cup cannot hold more. The cup does not apologize for this. It does not feel guilty. It does not try to expand itself to hold more than it can hold. It simply has a natural limit. And that limit is respected. So, I need to know my limits. More than know them, you need to honor them. You are not a bottomless vessel. You have a finite amount of energy each day, each week, each season of your life. If you try to give more than you have, you create debt that must eventually be repaid, usually with interest in the form of illness, burnout, or collapse. This is not a moral statement, it is simple reality. But how do I know where my limits are? By paying attention. Your body will tell you. Tiredness, irritability, resentment, physical symptoms, these are signals that you are approaching or crossing your limits. Most people ignore these signals until they become screams. I am teaching you to listen when they are whispers. Hiroshi absorbed this, understanding intellectually, but still uncertain about the practical application. Master Kenji, seeing his confusion, offered a more concrete practice. Each evening, before you sleep, I want you to check in with yourself. Ask, how full is my cup? If it is getting low, you know that the next day must include rest, replenishment, saying no to some requests. If it is full, you have energy to give freely. This simple practice of daily checking in will help you maintain balance rather than waiting until you collapse. And if someone needs help but my cup is low, then you help them find another source of help. You teach them to fish rather than giving them a fish. You set a boundary with compassion. Remember, you cannot give what you do not have. Giving from an empty cup serves no one, not you, and not them. That night, Hiroshi practiced this check-in for the first time. How full was his cup? Much fuller than a week ago, he realized. The constant rest and self-care had been replenishing him, filling the reservoir that had been drained to dangerous levels. But he also noticed that even now, after 6 days, he was not completely full. The depth of his depletion had been profound, and full recovery would take longer than a single week. This was important to understand. Burnout was not solved by a weekend of rest or even a week. It was the result of chronic depletion over months or years, and recovering from it required sustained attention and care. This was not a problem to be solved quickly, but a relationship to be tended over time. The relationship with himself, with his own needs and limits. On the 7th and final day of his rest, Hiroshi woke early and made his way to the pond in the pre-dawn darkness. He wanted to greet the sunrise from this place that had become sacred to him, this classroom where he had learned so much. The stars were still bright overhead, and the air was cool and fresh. He sat in his familiar spot and waited. As light began to seep into the eastern sky, turning it from black to deep blue to purple to rose, Hiroshi reflected on the week that was ending. He had arrived at this pond 7 days ago, broken, depleted, running on empty while pretending to be full. He had believed his worth came from his usefulness, that rest was weakness, that saying no was selfish, that he had to earn his right to exist through constant doing. Now, As the sun broke over the horizon in a blaze of gold, he understood differently. His worth was inherent, not earned. Rest was not weakness, but wisdom. Saying no was not selfish, but self-full. His right to exist was unconditional, given freely by the universe, simply because he was alive. These truths had not been taught through lectures or books, but through the direct experience of stopping, resting, and coming home to himself. Master Kenji arrived as the sun climbed higher, and they sat together in silence, watching the world wake up. Finally, the old teacher spoke. Tomorrow, you will return to activity, but I want you to understand that this week was not a vacation from life. It was a remembering of what life truly is. Activity and rest, giving and receiving, doing and being, these are not opposites but complementary aspects of a whole. A healthy life includes both. I understand, Master. Or at least, I'm beginning to understand. You will be tested. Old patterns will reassert themselves. The voice of conditioning will tell you that you are being lazy, that you should do more, that you are not enough. When this happens, and it will, I want you to come back to this pond. Come back to the feeling of spaciousness and peace you have found here. Let it remind you of who you truly are beneath all the doing. I will, Master. I promise. And remember, rest is not something you do only when you are depleted. It is a practice to be woven into daily life. Every day needs moments of stillness. Every week needs longer periods of replenishment. Every year needs extended rest. This is not optional. It is essential for a sustainable life. They rose together and bowed to the pond, to the trees, to the rising sun, to all the teachers that nature provides for those who will stop long enough to learn. As they walked back toward the monastery, Hiroshi felt ready. Not perfectly prepared, not without fear or doubt, but ready nonetheless. He had been given tools, had tasted a different way of being, and though he knew the path ahead would have challenges, he also knew he did not have to walk it in the depleted, exhausted way he had walked before. That evening, the monastery gathered for communal meditation in the main hall. Hiroshi took his place among his brothers, feeling both the same as he had always been, and utterly transformed. Master Kenji offered the evening teaching, and his words seemed directed specifically to Hiroshi, though they were meant for everyone. The spiritual path is not about becoming something you are not. It is about removing the obstacles that prevent you from recognizing what you have always been. You are not broken and in need of fixing. You are whole and in need of remembering. Rest is one way we remember. In stillness, we hear the truth beneath the noise. In spaciousness, we see clearly what was always there, but hidden by our busyness. The meditation bell rang, and the hall fell silent except for the sound of breathing. Hiroshi closed his eyes and settled into the present moment, feeling his breath move in and out, feeling his body supported by the cushion beneath him, feeling the vast spaciousness of awareness that held all experience. This was different from his meditations before the week of rest. Then, he had brought effort and striving even to his meditation practice. Now, he brought only presence, only willingness to be exactly as he was in this moment. Thoughts arose, plans for tomorrow when he would return to activity, worries about maintaining what he had learned, memories of the past week's insights. He watched them all arise and pass like clouds moving across the sky, neither grasping nor rejecting, simply observing. And in the space between thoughts, he tasted something eternal, a peace that did not depend on circumstances, a wholeness that could never be diminished, a love that was always present, though often overlooked. When the meditation ended and he opened his eyes, he felt tears on his cheeks, though he had not known he was crying. These were tears of gratitude, of recognition, of homecoming. He had spent so many years seeking something outside himself, approval, achievement, worth, when all along what he sought had been within, waiting patiently for him to stop running and come home. That night, As he lay in bed for the last time before returning to normal monastery duties, Hiroshi made a commitment to himself. He would not abandon himself again. He would not betray his own needs in service to others' expectations. He would honor the limits of his cup, would check in daily with his own state of being, would maintain boundaries even when it felt uncomfortable. This was not selfishness. It was a sacred responsibility. He could not serve from emptiness. He could not give what he did not have. And so, caring for himself was actually the most compassionate thing he could do, both for himself and for those he wished to serve. Morning came, and with it, the return to activity. Hiroshi woke at his usual early hour and, after sitting for a while in meditation, made his way to the kitchen to help prepare the morning meal. It felt strange to be working again after a week of rest, and he noticed the automatic urge to rush, to do more than was necessary, to prove that his rest had not been laziness. But he caught these impulses, recognized them for what they were, and consciously chose differently. He moved at a sustainable pace. He took breaks when he needed them. When another monk asked if he could take on an additional task, he paused, checked in with himself, and honestly assessed whether he had the energy. Finding that he did, he agreed, but with the understanding that if he reached his limit, he would stop. This way of moving through the world was radically different from his previous pattern. Before, he would have automatically said yes to any request, pushing through fatigue and resentment. Now, he was learning to be truthful about his capacity, to engage with life from a place of awareness rather than automaticity. Master Kenji observed him throughout the day, and in the evening, they met again by the pond. "How was your first day back?" the old teacher asked. "Different," Hiroshi replied. "I kept wanting to fall into old patterns, but I was able to catch myself. Not every time, but often. It felt uncomfortable, but right. Good. Change always feels uncomfortable at first. You are building new neural pathways, new habits, new ways of being. This takes time and repetition. Be patient with yourself. There will be days when you forget everything you learned, when you fall back into old patterns. This is normal. The practice is not to never fall, but to notice when you have fallen and to choose again. "I'm afraid of disappointing people by having boundaries," Hiroshi admitted. "Today, Brother Kenji asked me to take on organizing the Spring Festival, and I said I needed to think about it rather than automatically agreeing. He seemed surprised, maybe even disappointed. Yes, when you change, people who are used to the old, you may resist. They had a role for you in their mind, the always available helper, the one who never says no. When you step out of that role, it disrupts their expectations. Some will adjust and respect your boundaries. Others will try to guilt you back into your old patterns. This is their work to do, not yours. But what if I lose relationships because of my boundaries? What if people decide they don't want me around if I'm not always helpful?" Master Kenji's expression grew very tender. "Then those were not true relationships, but transactions. Real love does not require you to deplete yourself. Real love wants you whole, healthy, and happy. If someone only values you for what you do for them, rather than for who you are, that is not a relationship worth maintaining." This was a hard truth, and Hiroshi felt it land with both pain and relief. Pain, because he realized some of his relationships might indeed be transactional, built on his usefulness rather than genuine connection. Relief because he was being given permission to let go of relationships that required him to abandon himself. "You will find," Master Kenji continued, "that as you become clearer in your boundaries and more honoring of your own needs, the quality of your relationships will change. Some will fall away, yes, but new relationships will form, or old ones will deepen, based on authenticity and mutual respect rather than usefulness and transaction. You will attract people who value wholeness, both their own and yours. Over the following weeks, this teaching proved true. Hiroshi maintained his daily practice of checking in with his cup, of assessing his energy and honoring his limits. He said no more often than he ever had before, and yes, some people were disappointed. Brother Daichi remained somewhat distant, seeming to take personally Hiroshi's unavailability during his rest week. But others grew closer, drawn to the authenticity and presence that came from Hiroshi being rested and whole, rather than depleted and resentful. Brother Takeshi, inspired by watching Hiroshi's transformation, spoke with Master Kenji about his own burnout. He too was given time for rest and restoration. And he and Hiroshi formed a bond of shared understanding, checking in with each other regularly about maintaining balance and boundaries. Most surprisingly, Hiroshi found that his service to others actually became more effective, not less. When he helped someone from a place of genuine energy and presence, rather than obligation and depletion, the quality of that help was completely different. He could be fully present, could listen deeply, could offer wisdom rather than just advice. An hour of service from his rested, whole self was worth more than a full day of service from his depleted, resentful self. This reinforced one of Master Kenji's core teachings. You cannot pour from an empty cup. The math was simple. If he maintained his cup at a healthy level, he could sustainably serve for years. If he depleted himself completely, he would crash and be unable to serve anyone. Self-care was not opposed to service. It was the foundation of sustainable service. As the seasons changed and spring blossomed into summer, Hiroshi continued to deepen his practice of balanced living. He noticed that his meditation had transformed. What was once a struggle was now a refuge. The cushion was no longer a place where he tried to force his mind into submission, but a place where he could simply rest in awareness, allowing everything to be as it was. His creativity also blossomed. In his rest week, when he had played with stones with Master Kenji, something had awakened. He began to write poetry, to arrange flowers, to engage in calligraphy, all activities that served no practical purpose but nourished his soul. He understood now that humans need both productive work and purposeless play, both doing and being, both giving and receiving. One evening, a villager came to the monastery seeking help. Her name was Yuki, and she was weeping as she climbed the path to the gates. She asked to speak with a monk, and Hiroshi was called. He sat with Yuki in the garden and listened as she poured out her story. "I don't know what to do," she sobbed. "I work 3 jobs to support my family. My husband is ill and cannot work. My children need me. My elderly mother needs care. Everyone needs me, and I'm so tired. I'm so tired I want to disappear. I thought about walking into the forest and never coming back. What's wrong with me? Why am I so weak?" Hiroshi's heart ached with recognition and compassion. He saw himself in this woman, the exhaustion, the belief that she should be able to do more, the shame at her own human limits. He took her hand gently and said, "Nothing is wrong with you. You are not weak. You are exhausted. And exhaustion is not a character flaw. It is a signal." He spent the next hour sharing with Yuki what he had learned from Master Kenji and from his own week of rest. He spoke about cups and limits, about the difference between selfishness and self-fullness, about the impossibility of sustainable giving from a place of depletion. He spoke about how caring for herself was not a betrayal of her family, but a necessity for being able to care for them well. Yuki listened with growing attention, and slowly, her tears shifted from despair to relief. "I thought I just had to try harder," she whispered. "I thought I was failing because I couldn't do it all." "You are not failing. You are human. Humans have limits. Those limits are not weaknesses. They are features, not bugs. They are the body's wisdom, trying to protect you from destroying yourself." Together, they problem-solved. What could be delegated? What community resources were available? What expectations could be released or renegotiated? Yuki had been operating under the belief that she had to do everything herself, that asking for help was weakness. Hiroshi helped her see that interdependence was not weakness but wisdom, that humans were designed to live in community, to give and receive support. When Yuki left that evening, her face looked lighter, her shoulders less burdened. She still had all the same circumstances, but she had a different relationship to them. She had permission to be human, to have limits, to ask for help, and that permission was transformative. After she left, Master Kenji, who had been observing from a distance, approached Hiroshi. "Well done," he said simply. "You gave her what you learned. You passed on the teaching. This is how wisdom spreads, not through lectures and books alone, but through one person learning and then sharing from their own experience." Hiroshi bowed. She reminded me of myself. I could help her because I had been where she was. Yes, this is often how it works. Our pain, when transformed through awareness and healing, becomes medicine for others. Your burnout, your rest, your recovery, this is not just your story. It is a teaching for everyone who pushes themselves beyond sustainable limits. Everyone who believes their worth comes from their productivity. Everyone who has forgotten how to care for themselves. The months continued to pass, and Hiroshi's transformation deepened and stabilized. He no longer needed Master Kenji's daily guidance to maintain his boundaries and self-care practices. They had become internalized, part of his new way of being. He checked in with his cup daily. He rested regularly. He played. He said no without excessive guilt. He said yes from genuine energy rather than obligation. And his life, rather than falling apart as he had feared, actually became richer. He had fewer superficial relationships, but deeper, authentic ones. He accomplished less in terms of sheer quantity of tasks, but what he did accomplish was of higher quality. He was more present, more creative, more genuinely joyful. The exhausted fog that had colored his entire existence had lifted, and he was experiencing life with vividness and clarity. One day, about a year after his week of rest, Master Kenji asked Hiroshi to walk with him to the pond. They sat in the familiar spot where so much learning had occurred, and the old teacher smiled at his student. "Do you remember sitting here a year ago?" Master Kenji asked. "So depleted you could barely feel anything, so exhausted you had forgotten what it meant to be alive." "Yes, Master. I remember. It feels like a different lifetime." In many ways it was. That version of you died, and a new version was born. Not because you became someone different, but because you removed the obstacles to being who you truly were. This is the spiritual path, not becoming, but revealing. Not adding, but subtracting. I want to thank you, Master, for saving my life, because that's what you did. If I had continued as I was, I would have collapsed, maybe died. You intervened. Master Kenji shook his head gently. "I did not save you. I simply held up a mirror so you could see yourself clearly. The choice to rest, to change, to honor yourself, that was yours. I only offered permission for something you already knew you needed. Never give away your own power by attributing your transformation to another. You saved yourself. I was merely a guide." They sat in comfortable silence, and Hiroshi realized how far he had come. The journey from burnout to balance was not a straight line. There had been setbacks, days when he fell back into old patterns, moments of doubt and resistance. But overall, the trajectory had been toward wholeness, toward integration, toward a way of living that was sustainable and authentic. "Master," Hiroshi said, "I've been thinking, what I learned, about rest, boundaries, self-care, the dangers of burnout. This is knowledge that everyone needs. Not just monks, but villagers, workers, parents, everyone. Our entire culture is set up to create burnout. We glorify busyness and demonize rest. We measure worth by productivity. We shame people for having human limits. This is a sickness, and it's everywhere." Master Kenji nodded slowly. "Yes, You have seen truly. This is indeed a collective illness, not just an individual one. And so I want to teach this. I want to help others the way you helped me, the way I helped Yuki. I want to speak this truth into a world that desperately needs to hear it. The old teacher's eyes sparkled with approval and joy. This is your calling then, not just to be healed, but to become a healer. Not just to rest, but to teach the wisdom of rest. This is good work, important work. The world needs people who understand burnout from the inside and have found their way through it. From that conversation, Hiroshi's path forward became clear. He continued his duties at the monastery, but he also began to offer teachings in the village, holding space for people to share their exhaustion and learn practices of restoration. He spoke about the cup and its limits. He taught about checking in with oneself daily. He gave permission for rest, for boundaries, for self-care. Some people resisted. They had too much invested in the old paradigm. The belief that worth equals productivity. They heard his teachings as lazy, indulgent, selfish. Hiroshi learned to let this resistance be theirs without taking it personally. He had learned his truth through direct experience, and no amount of argument would convince someone who was not ready to hear. But many others received his teachings like water in a desert. They wept with relief at being given permission to be human, to have limits to care for themselves. They shared stories of their own exhaustion, their own struggles with burnout, their own fear of being insufficient. And in that sharing, in that community of mutual understanding and support, healing happened. One woman, a mother of 4 named Sakura, told Hiroshi after one of his talks, "I've been exhausted for so long, I forgot what it felt like to not be exhausted. I thought this was just how life was. You've given me hope that something different is possible." This, Hiroshi understood, was the heart of the teaching. Hope, the knowledge that burnout was not a life sentence but a condition that could be healed. That rest was not weakness but wisdom. That wholeness was possible. This hope, born from his own experience of transformation, was what he had to offer. As another year passed, Hiroshi noticed something beautiful. The people who learned about sustainable living, boundaries, and self-care began to teach others. Yuki, the woman who had come to him in despair, now held gatherings in her home for other overwhelmed mothers, sharing what she had learned. Brother Takeshi began to teach younger monks about maintaining balance from the beginning, rather than waiting until burnout forced them to. The wisdom was spreading, rippling outward like stones thrown into a pond. Master Kenji, now growing very old, watched all of this with satisfaction. One evening, as he and Hiroshi sat by their beloved pond, watching the sunset, he said, "I am proud of you, my student. You have taken your pain and transformed it into medicine. You have taken your learning and made it into teaching. This is the path of the Bodhisattva, to heal oneself and then to help heal the world." Hiroshi bowed deeply, feeling the truth of his teacher's words. His journey from burnout to balance had not been just personal. It was connected to the collective healing that the world so desperately needed. Every person who learned to honor their limits, to rest without guilt, to care for themselves with compassion, was pushing back against a toxic culture that consumed people's life force and called it virtue. "Master, what do you think is at the root of this collective illness?" Hiroshi asked. "Why does our culture create conditions for burnout?" Master Kenji was quiet for a long moment, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Finally, he spoke. "I believe it comes from a deep sense of unworthiness. Somewhere in our collective consciousness, we absorb the belief that we must earn our right to exist, that love and belonging are conditional upon our usefulness. This belief drives people to push beyond their limits, to sacrifice their well-being, to prove their worth through endless doing. But where does this belief come from? From many sources. Economic systems that require constant growth and productivity. Religious teachings that emphasize self-sacrifice and martyrdom. Family patterns where love was conditional upon achievement. trauma responses where we learned that being useful kept us safe. The sources are many, but the result is the same: people who are exhausted, depleted, and suffering while believing this is how it should be. Hiroshi absorbed this, understanding how his own burnout had been both personal and cultural, both individual and collective. So, healing burnout isn't just about individual rest, it's about challenging these deeper beliefs and systems. Yes, the personal is political, as some say. When you rest in a culture that glorifies busyness, this is a radical act. When you set boundaries in a system that demands your total availability, this is revolutionary. When you declare your inherent worth independent of productivity, you challenge the very foundations of an exploitative system. This conversation stayed with Hiroshi long after the sun had set and stars had emerged. He began to understand his teaching work, not just as helping individuals, but as participating in a larger cultural shift, a collective awakening to more humane and sustainable ways of being. He started to speak more explicitly about the systemic issues that contributed to burnout. In his talks, he addressed not just individual practices, but cultural beliefs, economic pressures, and social expectations that pushed people toward exhaustion. Some people were uncomfortable with this more political framing. They wanted practical tips for individual self-care without examining the larger context. But others felt relief at having their experience validated, at understanding that their exhaustion was not just a personal failing, but a reasonable response to unreasonable demands. One evening, a businessman from a nearby town came to hear Hiroshi speak. His name was Kenji, the same name as Hiroshi's teacher, and he owned a textile factory that employed over 100 people. He listened intently as Hiroshi spoke about sustainable rhythms of work and rest, about the importance of honoring human limits, about the long-term costs of exploitation and overwork. After the talk, businessman Kenji approached Hiroshi. "What you said tonight challenged me deeply," he admitted. "I have been pushing my workers hard, believing this is necessary for the business to survive, but I see now that I am creating burnout, depleting the very people upon whom my business depends. And I realize I am also depleted myself, working 16-hour days, never resting, believing this is what a good owner does." Hiroshi listened with compassion, hearing the genuine struggle in the man's voice. "What would it look like to run your business differently?" he asked. "I don't know. I fear that if we slow down, we'll lose our competitive edge. But I also fear what will happen if we continue as we are. I've already lost good workers to illness and exhaustion, and I myself feel like I'm dying by inches." They spoke for hours that night, exploring what a more humane business might look like. Adequate rest breaks, sustainable work hours, fair wages that didn't require people to work multiple jobs, respect for employees' boundaries and personal lives. It was a radical reimagining, and businessman Kenji was both excited and terrified by it. "I want to try," he said finally. "I don't know if it will work economically, but I know the current path is unsustainable. Will you help me? Will you come to my factory and teach my workers what you've taught the villagers here?" Hiroshi agreed, and thus his teaching work expanded beyond the monastery and village into the workplace itself. He began to spend several days each month at the textile factory, holding talks during lunch breaks, meeting with individual workers, advising the owner on policies that would support rather than exploit his employees. The transformation was not instant or easy. Some workers were suspicious, believing this was a manipulation to get more work out of them. Some were so conditioned to overwork that they didn't know how to accept rest. Business pressures were real. There were orders to fill, deadlines to meet, economic realities to navigate. But slowly, incrementally, the culture of the factory began to shift. Workers were given genuine breaks and encouraged to take them. The workday was reduced from 12 hours to 10, then to 8. When someone was sick, they were sent home to rest rather than pressured to work through it. And remarkably, productivity did not collapse. In fact, after an initial adjustment period, it actually improved. Workers who were rested made fewer mistakes, had fewer accidents, showed more creativity and engagement. Businessman Kenji himself transformed. He reduced his own hours, delegated more, learned to rest. He joined one of Hiroshi's ongoing groups for people recovering from burnout and was open about his own struggles and learning. In doing so, he modeled for his workers that self-care was not weakness and that asking for help was not failure. Other business owners heard about the experiment at the textile factory, and some were curious, some were skeptical, some were hostile. Hiroshi was invited to speak at gatherings of merchants and business leaders, where he often faced resistance and argument. This is idealistic, some would say. The market won't support it. We'll be driven out of business by competitors who work harder. Hiroshi would respond calmly, perhaps. But consider what we're currently doing. We're consuming people, their health, their lives, their souls, in service to profit. Is this really sustainable? Is this really success? What good is a thriving business if the people who run it are dying? What good is economic growth if it comes at the cost of human well-being? These questions were uncomfortable, challenging fundamental assumptions about how the world worked. But they also planted seeds, opening up possibilities for different ways of organizing work and life. Not everyone was ready to hear them, but some were. And that was enough. Meanwhile, back at the monastery, Master Kenji's health was declining. He was now very old, and his body was beginning to fail in the way that all bodies eventually do. Hiroshi spent more time with his teacher, treasuring their remaining conversations. One day, as they sat by the pond that had been the site of so much learning, Master Kenji said, "I am preparing to die." Hiroshi felt grief rise in his chest, though he had known this day would come. "How do you feel about it?" he asked. "Peaceful, curious, ready. I have lived a long life, taught many students, watched wisdom spread like ripples across water. My work is complete. Now it is time for the next adventure, whatever that may be." "I will miss you terribly," Hiroshi said, tears beginning to flow. "And I will miss you. But I will also be with you, in the lessons you carry, in the practices you've internalized, in the wisdom that now lives in you and will be passed on to others. Death is not an ending, but a transformation. Like water changing from liquid to vapor, the essence remains. Only the form changes." They sat together in silence, and Hiroshi felt the preciousness of the moment. This teacher, this pond, this life, all of it temporary and therefore infinitely valuable. He understood viscerally what he had learned intellectually, that impermanence was not something to fear, but something to honor, that the temporary nature of all things made them sacred, that loss and death were part of the great cycle that included birth and renewal. In the weeks that followed, Master Kenji grew weaker. Hiroshi cared for him tenderly, helping him eat, supporting him when he needed to move, sitting with him in companionable silence. Other monks also attended to their beloved teacher, and there was a sense throughout the monastery of collective grief and gratitude. Grief that they would lose him, gratitude for all he had given them. One evening, as Hiroshi sat beside Master Kenji's bed, the old teacher opened his eyes and spoke with surprising strength. "I want to give you one final teaching," he said. "Come close." Hiroshi leaned in, holding his teacher's frail hand. "Everything I taught you about rest, boundaries, self-care, these are important. But there is something deeper still. Beneath all the doing and not doing, beneath the exhaustion and the restoration, beneath even the wisdom of knowing your limits, there is something unchanging. There is awareness itself, the consciousness that witnesses all experience. That awareness is what you truly are, not the exhausted monk, not the restored monk, not any temporary state or condition, but the awareness that knows all states." "I don't fully understand, Master." "You don't need to understand with your mind, but you can recognize it through direct experience. Right now, as you listen to my words, there is something in you that is aware of listening. As you feel grief about my coming death, there is something in you that is aware of the grief. That aware presence is your true nature. It is never depleted. It cannot burn out. It is always whole, always at peace, always sufficient. Hiroshi sat with these words, and something in him shifted, recognizing a truth that went beyond concepts. Yes, there was awareness here. Aware of the room, the dying teacher, the emotions, the thoughts. And that awareness was spacious, peaceful, unchanging. It had been there all along, through his burnout and his recovery, through every experience of his life. It was what he truly was. Rest deeply in that awareness, Master Kenji whispered. Let it be your ultimate refuge. Then, from that place of fullness, you can act in the world without being depleted by action, can give without being diminished by giving, can serve without being destroyed by service. This is the secret, not to be always resting or always acting, but to rest in your true nature while engaging with life. These were Master Kenji's final words. He closed his eyes, smiled peacefully, and within a few hours, his breathing slowed and stopped. He died as he had lived, with grace, awareness, and an unshakable peace. The monastery mourned him deeply, and Hiroshi most of all. But even in the midst of grief, Hiroshi carried his teacher's final teaching. He began to practice resting in awareness itself, noticing the space of consciousness that held all experience. This became his deepest meditation practice, his ultimate refuge, his source of renewal that went beyond mere physical rest. Time passed, and Hiroshi continued his teaching work, now carrying not only his own experience of burnout and recovery, but also his teacher's final wisdom. He spoke about practical matters, boundaries, self-care, sustainable rhythms, but he also pointed people to the deeper dimension, the awareness that was their true nature, that could never be depleted, because it was not a resource to be used up, but the very ground of being itself. His teachings evolved and deepened. He began to train other teachers, people who had gone through their own burnout and recovery, and now wanted to help others. He developed a formal program, combining practical tools with contemplative practices, addressing both individual healing and systemic change. The work grew larger than him, becoming a movement, not in a grand, organized sense, but in the organic way that truth spreads when it meets readiness. Years passed. Hiroshi himself grew older, and he became increasingly vigilant about maintaining his own practices. He knew that the risk of burnout never fully disappeared, that vigilance was required to maintain balance. He continued to check in with his cup daily. He continued to honor his limits. He continued to say no without guilt, and he continued to rest in the awareness that was his deepest nature. One day, a young monk came to him, eager, passionate, working himself to exhaustion in service to others. Hiroshi recognized himself in this young man and smiled. "Come walk with me," Hiroshi said to the young monk, whose name was Ren. They made their way through the monastery grounds to a familiar place, the pond that had been Hiroshi's classroom so many years before. The water was still and clear, reflecting the sky like a perfect mirror. "Sit," Hiroshi instructed, gesturing to the spot where he himself had sat when Master Kenji first brought him here. Ren sat, looking confused and slightly impatient, clearly wondering why he had been pulled away from his important work. "Tell me," Hiroshi said gently, "when was the last time you truly rested?" Ren looked uncomfortable. "I rest when I sleep, brother. But there is so much to do. People need help. The garden needs tending. The scriptures need copying. How can I rest when there is so much that needs doing?" Hiroshi felt a wave of tenderness, hearing his own younger voice echoing in these words. "Let me tell you a story," he said, settling into a comfortable position beside the young monk. "Many years ago, there was a monk who believed exactly what you believe, that his worth came from his usefulness, that rest was weakness, that he had to earn his right to exist through constant service. He worked himself into complete depletion, into what we call burnout. He was dying by inches, his light going out, and he didn't even realize it. He told Ren the story of his own burnout and recovery, of Master Kenji's intervention, of the week of rest that had changed his life. He spoke about learning to honor limits, to set boundaries, to distinguish between self-care and selfishness. He shared the practical tools and the deeper wisdom. Ren listened with growing attention. And Hiroshi could see the recognition dawning, the understanding that his own path was heading toward the same cliff that Hiroshi had once stood at. "But if I stop," Ren said, voicing the same fear Hiroshi had once felt, "everything will fall apart. People depend on me." "And when you collapse from exhaustion?" Hiroshi asked gently. "What happens then? Will things not fall apart even more completely? The truth is, the world does not need you to destroy yourself. The world needs you whole, rested, truly present. You cannot give what you do not have. You cannot pour from an empty cup." He saw tears forming in Ren's eyes, the same tears he himself had shed when Master Kenji first offered him permission to rest, to be human, to have limits. "I'm so tired," Ren whispered. "I'm so tired. But I don't know how to stop." "Then let me teach you," Hiroshi said. "Just as my teacher taught me, I will teach you. For the next 7 days, you will do nothing, nothing that you consider work. You will come to this pond. You will rest. You will remember what it means to simply be rather than constantly do. And through this practice, you will discover something precious. You will discover yourself beneath all the doing." Ren looked terrified and hopeful in equal measure. 7 days. 7 days. I will speak with the abbot and arrange it. Trust me, Ren. This is not indulgence. This is necessity. You are on the edge of burnout, and if you do not stop now, voluntarily, your body will force you to stop involuntarily through illness or collapse. Which would you prefer? Ren nodded slowly, accepting the wisdom of what Hiroshi was offering. And so the cycle continued. Student became teacher, the healed became healer, the wisdom passed on like a lamp lighting another lamp, the original flame not diminished, but multiplied. Over the following week, Hiroshi guided Ren through the same process Master Kenji had guided him through. Each day, they met by the pond and spoke about what Ren was experiencing, the resistance, the guilt, the fear, and gradually the relief, the reconnection, the remembering. Hiroshi watched Ren's transformation with joy and gratitude, understanding now what Master Kenji must have felt watching him all those years ago. On the 7th day, as Ren prepared to return to activity, Hiroshi offered him the same teaching Master Kenji had offered. This week was not a vacation from life, but a remembering of what life truly is. The challenge now is to weave rest into your daily existence, to maintain boundaries, to honor your limits. Every evening, check in with yourself. Ask, how full is my cup? Let that awareness guide your choices. Ren bowed deeply to Hiroshi. Thank you, you've saved my life. No, Hiroshi said, echoing the words Master Kenji had once spoken to him. You saved yourself. I simply held up a mirror. The choice was yours. As Hiroshi walked back to his room that evening, he felt the circle completing. He had been the exhausted monk who needed saving. Then he had been the recovering monk, learning to live differently. Then he became the teacher passing on wisdom. And now he was the elder, training the next generation of teachers, ensuring that the wisdom would continue to spread long after he himself was gone. He thought about Master Kenji, wondered if his teacher could somehow see what his teaching had blossomed into. A single intervention, one student pulled back from the edge of collapse, had grown into a movement of people learning to honor their humanity, to resist a culture of burnout, to live with wisdom and balance. This was the power of teaching. It multiplied exponentially, rippling outward in ways the original teacher might never fully know. That night, Hiroshi sat in meditation in his room, settling into the spacious awareness that was his deepest nature. He reflected on the journey from burnout to balance, from depletion to wholeness, from self-abandonment to self-love. It had been a long road, and the work was never finished. Maintaining balance required ongoing vigilance and practice. But it was work that gave meaning to his life. Work that arose from his own suffering, transformed into medicine for others. He thought about all the people who were, in this very moment, exhausted and depleted, believing they had to push through, believing rest was weakness, believing their worth depended on their productivity. He held them in his heart with compassion, knowing that many would not find their way to rest until forced by collapse. But he also trusted that the teaching was spreading, that more people were learning about sustainable living before they reached the breaking point, that cultural change, though slow, was happening. As he prepared for sleep, Hiroshi felt profound gratitude for Master Kenji who had saved him, for his own willingness to change, for every person who had received the teaching and passed it on, for the burnout itself that had forced him to wake up and learn a better way. Everything, even the suffering, had been necessary. Everything had brought him to this moment of peace, wholeness, and service. He lay down and closed his eyes, his body relaxed, his mind quiet, his heart at peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to practice what he had learned, new students to teach. But for now, he simply rested, not as a reward to be earned, but as a necessity to be honored, not as weakness, but as wisdom, not as the absence of action, but as its foundation. In the darkness of his room, he whispered a final prayer of gratitude. Thank you for the exhaustion that taught me to rest. Thank you for the depletion that taught me to replenish. Thank you for the burnout that taught me to honor my limits. Thank you for the suffering that became medicine. May all beings find their way from exhaustion to peace, from depletion to wholeness, from burnout to balance. May all beings know that they are worthy not because of what they do, but because they are. May all beings rest deeply and live fully. And with that prayer, he drifted into sleep, his breath gentle and even, his body supported by the earth, his spirit held by the vast awareness that was his true nature, never depleted, never exhausted, always whole, always home.